I call this talk a deeper dive into WinLink Express maps. And we're going to talk about mapping and forms that can be mapped and a lot of other things related to that, selecting uh, reports to display and coloring reports and doing other fancy filtering. And we're going to talk about some other things too. And this is a kind of an outline of what I'd like to do this evening if we don't run out of time. And I think we'll have time for all of this. We're going to do a quick review of mappable forms, and I suspect most of you are pretty familiar with using forms, but we're run through some things about them and talk about the different types of form fields. And there are three types of fields we'll get to, and talk about how the information you enter on forms is attached to messages and transmitted to the receiving stations where it can be displayed, and how when that information, that message with the mapping information is received, how it's assimilated into Express, stored in the database where it can be then displayed. We're going to look a little bit about different types of maps and the choices you have. And then we're going to get into filtering maps where you can select reports based on things like whether they have internet, don't have internet, have phone service, don't have phone service. And that's going to really be, I think, the heart of the talk. That's fairly complex, and we're going to spend a good bit of time on it. We're going to talk about generating summary statistics from the reports you received, including percentages of different, broken down different ways, and also exporting map data. If you want to send it to someone else, or also export it so it can be used by commercial GIS programs. We're going to talk about mapping other types of messages, like just text messages that you receive from people. And we're going to wrap it up with looking at how you can view a map of RMS locations and use that map to select an RMS that you want to call. So that's the basic outline of the talk. So let's get into it. This is going to be a live presentation, which is always dangerous. I think you all are pretty familiar with this screen. Now let's talk about the basic flow of sending form information that can be used for mapping and map filtering. And this is probably a review, but maybe there's somebody in here that isn't familiar with that. Well, this, if you're totally unfamiliar with this, is the main screen of our WinLink Express program. And if you're familiar with any email client, Outlook, or something similar, it's very similar in concept to that. It has an inbox and read items, outbox, and so forth. And sending a message, you can just click this icon at the left end of the toolbar, this little blank page, and then you'd put the recipient, either the call sign or email address in the subject, and type in the text, just as you would do with any email program. But we've also got built in to WinLink Express a whole bunch of forms. And there are many types of forms broken into categories. And Oliver is going to give a talk in a week or two where he's going to talk about the general form library and give a lot of information about that. So I'm not going to break down all of the different forms. And I think there are over 100 altogether. Like, see each of these categories. Let's see, here's ICS forms, a bunch of ICS standard forms and so forth. But this particular category right here, mapping GIS forms, are the only ones that can be used to send reports that can be mapped and have filtering done on them. There are a good number of them, and the list continues to expand as Greg gets around to adding more of them. The one we're going to focus on this evening is the field situation report. And if you haven't used it, you ought to experiment with it. But it looks like this, and it has recipients, and we get down into the body where you got the city and the county and the state where you're located, And then you've got a bunch of multiple choice here, like or plain old telephones functioning, yes, no, or unknown. Lots of things, satellite, TV, cable, internet, commercial power, and so forth. And we've also got fields underneath each one where you can put a comment in. There are three types of fields that can be put on these forms. You have the multiple choice, like this would be a good example, yes, no, or unknown. Could just be yes, no, could be, multiple choices. You have a text field where you can put a comment in. City, county, and state, territory would all be text fields. And we also have numeric fields. So there aren't any numeric fields in this form, but a numeric field, you'd find numeric fields on weather report forms where you've got wind speed, temperature, things like that. So those are the three types of fields that can be sent in. And when we get into the filtering part, we'll talk about how each type can be used for selection. Okay, let me get out of this one. When you fill out one of those forms and attach it to a message, there are two files attached to the message. Let's select this and look at the attachments. Oops, I have on a better one. Find a better one here. Just a second. Here's a field situation report. Let's look at attachments. There will be two files attached to it. One is an XML file, RMS Express form field situation report viewer.xml. That has the information that's used for displaying the form on the receiving end. The second file is the form data.txt file. That file has the information from each of those fields where you made selections like yes, no, or unknown, or typed in a comment, or in the case of a weather report, put in a numeric value. So all of those values are in here, and that's what's used for the actual mapping and filtering. If you use one of the forms that's not designed for mapping, you'll only have a single file. Any form you use will have the XML file because that's the basic information used to display the form on the receiving end. But there's only the mapping forms have the form data.txt file. So that's how they're sent. Now, how are they received and assimilated? When you send one of these messages, you can address it to one or more recipients. When the message arrives and is downloaded by WInLink Express on the receiving end, as soon as it's received, WInLink Express looks to see if there's a form data.txt file attached to it. And this is done at the time it's downloaded and stored in the database. If there is a form data.txt file, it parses that file, and assuming it's valid format, it then makes an entry in the database for the particular type of form that this data is for. So in this case, it would add an entry to the field situation report database. If you were sending messages that had come from let's say a local weather report, it would add that data to the database for the local weather report form. And we'll see in a minute that you can select which form you want to view in the map and do selections on. Now, one thing to note is that assimilation of that data and the storage in the form database occurs at the time that you download the message. You don't actually have to view the message. And by that, I mean, select it, click on it, where you've selected as the active message. You can, it will be certainly done if you click on it, but you don't have to. As soon as it's received and downloaded, the data is added to the database. Now that's really handy because you can set up, if you have a telnet connection, for example, you can set up a telnet session which will poll the CMS periodically, maybe every 5 or 10 minutes, and pull down any incoming messages for you. And as they're pulled down, if any of the messages have form data.txt files, that information will be immediately added to the database. And in fact, if you have the map displayed for that type of report, new marker pins will show up on the map dynamically whenever a message is received that way. So you can continue looking at the map and see new reports coming in and markers showing up. You can also have the data exported whenever a new report comes in, and we'll get to that in a minute. So that's how the data is sent and received. Now let's look at mapping it. Up here in the toolbar, I hope you can see this, there's a little globe icon. I'm moving over it, try to highlight it for you. If you click on that globe icon, it'll open the mapping control screen. And there are a good number of things on here. We're going to look at some of these other fields later on about exporting the data and so forth. But for now, we're just going to experiment, look at it, play with it a little bit. So I've got some data that was collected some months ago by a good exercise carried out by RECWT Region 4 and 6. And I'm going to use that as the example tonight. So I've got that type of form pulled up. You'll notice that I have others to choose from, but this is the one that has the data from that exercise. So let's just take a quick look at the map. Okay, I hope that's displaying okay. We have a blue marker pin for every report that's received during this exercise. We have a green pin here in the middle. That's my location. So you'll always have a green pin where you're located relative to the others. This is a particular map we're looking at is using a Bing map format. I could change it to something else. Let's say I change it to Bing Hybrid, which has merges in a satellite view. You can see it's a little more complicated. Now it's got some rivers and mountains and so forth blended in. Let me see another filter, another type of map. Let's take a look at, let's see, maybe a topo map and see what that looks like. Well, we can see we've got where the mountains and valleys are here and plains out here. So, you can choose different types of maps. I prefer the Bing map, but you may prefer something else. So let's go back into the map display with Bing here. If you put your cursor over a marker, you get a summary. This was sent, well, let me pick one that's not a share station. Oops, here we are. Sent by N5LQV. And there's the date and time it was sent, how old it is, and the subject, the message. Now, if I click on the marker, then it pops up a screen. And this is pretty small type. This may be hard for you to see, but every field on that field situation report form, like landlines functioning, yes, landlines comment, cell phones functioning, yes, cell phones comment, and so forth, so on, everything that person reported is displayed here. So if you want to get the details of what this person said about their location, situation there, all you have to do is just select it and click on it, and boom, there you've got the report. And down in the comments, we've got exercise, Mike, his name, and so forth. So all of the fields, date, time, and everything else, latitude and longitude, range and bearing relative to your location, the priority, the agency, and so forth, so on, can be called up very easily by simply clicking on one of the marker pins. Okay, now that's nice, but what if we want to isolate some information, like we'd like to know which of these people do not have internet? So that's where we get into the map filtering. Let me open the filters up here on this, with the top menu bar. Leftmost is their set filters button. So I'm going to click that. Now this is a very complicated screen. We're going to go through, I think, pretty much everything on this screen. It's, as I said, it's complicated. There's a lot of choices here, a lot of different options to turn on and off. Looking at the main body here in these columns, if I scroll down, you'll see that each of the questions on the form like cell phones functioning, commercial power functioning, internet function, is in this first column. And then we've got an operator, which is by default equals. In other words, if internet functioning is equal to, and then over here, right now we've got ignore, which means we don't care about that. Whatever value it has is fine. Don't do any selection, don't do any coloring, nothing. But let's say what we'd like to do, open this up. Let's say select no. So we've got, is internet functioning? If the answer is no, over here, let's make the color red. Okay, internet functioning equals no, select red. Okay, let's see what happens when we do that. Now, notice this. Over here around Dallas, Fort Worth, we've got a cluster of red pins. Got one down here. We've got a little cluster up here. We've got some scattered ones down here in Florida. Okay, well, that's interesting. You can certainly see from the map where there are clusters of no internet. But it's a little difficult to pick out because we've got all the other points kind of crowding them. So let's go back into the filters for a second and change an option here down to the bottom, and I'll read it to you. This group says which markers to show on map. And we've got two choices right now. We've selected display all markers using colors to indicate selected ones. The second choice, which we're going to choose, display only markers selected by filters. So in other words, what this says is only the ones that are matching here. In other words, internet function equals no, display only those markers. Let's see what happens now. So now we've cleared all the other ones that have internet, and we've got only the red markers where we have no internet. And it makes it a lot easier to see where we have internet outages. You could obviously do the same thing with any of these choices, like you want to know where the power is out or something else. Let's go back and make another choice. Let's say plain old telephone system. Where's that? Hold on. Where's POTS? Oh, come on. Landlines, precedents. Somewhere here there ought to be a POTS in there. Cell phones, internet. Landlines. Here we go. Landlines. And let's say if we have no POTS, let's make that be yellow. Okay, so I've got two choices now. I've got landlines functioning equals no plain old telephone set. Just mark that as yellow. And we've got, still have the internet functioning no marked in red. So let's take a look at that. Here we go. Okay, notice we've got some scattered yellows. Here's a yellow, here's a yellow, here's a green where I am. And we've got a couple, we've got the reds, which are no internets. We understand that. But look at this, we've got a white one. We've got another white one over here. Now, what is the white? We know what yellow is, that's no landline. We know what red is, that's no internet. But what is white? Well, let's take a look at it. What white is, we've got cell phone functioning no, and internet functioning no. We've got both conditions, cell phone functioning no, or landlines no POTS, and internet no. So why is it white? I'll show you why. Go back to filters here a second. Down in this field here, right here, color if multiple colors are selected. In other words, what we've done here, we've had red for no internet, and we have yellow for no POTS, no landline. But what if we have no internet and no POTS? So we want it to be red because there's no internet. We'd want it to be yellow because there's no POTS, but we've got both. And in that case, you can choose what color to use in that condition, and it's white. I mean, you can choose something else if you want to. I thought white made sense because it's all colors. So going back here, we can see these people have no internet and no landlines. And here are a couple of others with no internet and no landlines. The red ones are just no internet. and the other ones like this and this are just no POTS. Hope that makes sense. Okay, going back over here. Now, another thing we can do, what we've got right now is displayed in this column is only the items on the form that were multiple choice. Remember, we had like yes, no, or unknown for each of these. But we don't have any of the comments or the other text fields like agency, city and state, and so forth. But up here, this checkbox right here, you can see things changing when I check it. When I check it, it says include text fields such as comments as filter items. So now we have not only the multiple choice items like AM, broadcast, and so forth, but we've got all the comments, cell phones commenting, cell phones. We've got city, for example, which is a text field. Now, how do you choose that? Well, let's go down. Let me clear all the selections so we don't get too confused here. And let's go down. Let's take an example, state. Suppose we want to see all the reports that came in from Tennessee. So I'm going to put TN in the state field, and the comparison operator is a star, which means if it has TN anywhere in the field, then select it. And let's display only marker selected by that, and we'll give them a Tennessee. We'll make them a purple. So let's see how that looks. Okay, there we go. So what I've done now is selected only the reports that have come in from Tennessee. So I can see all the people there. And let's go back and let's say change that to, let's go Texas and save that, and boom, there are all the reports that came in from Texas. Now, what if you want to have more than one state? Well, they can do that too. Since the Carolinas tend to get hit by hurricanes together, let's take a look at the Carolinas. So we're going to do North Carolina and then a comma and then a South Carolina. So that when you put two text fields in with a comma, either one matching will do the selection. So let's save that. And here we have all the reports came from both North Carolina and South Carolina separated out. Now you could also, you could do other kinds of selections on top of that. Let's go back here and for a second, and let me show you another thing you can do. So we've got this one set up with North Carolina, South Carolina, and maybe we think we might want to go back to that frequently. What we can do is store current selection as a filter set. So what I'm going to do is call this the Carolinas and save that. And what that does is save everything we have set here is now saved as selecting North Carolina, South Carolina. Okay, let's do another one here. Let's go back to the Texas one. And let's save that. We'll call it Texas and save that. Now, we've got Texas selected and we see Texas. We go back into the filters and I open this drop down. I've got Carolinas here. Select that and click Save. And I'm back to the Carolinas. Now, this example is not all that super handy switching between states, but when you get more complicated filters, where you're selecting maybe the people in the Carolinas who don't have internet, maybe yellow for no phones or power out or something like that, and you get a particular set of filter criteria that you think are important, you can save it as a filter set like that and then switch back and forth. Another place where filter sets are handy is in, let me get away from those, up here where you can do date range selection. And there's several choices on date range. One is do not limit reports by age or date, in which case it's going to display all of them regardless of how old they are. And that's what we've been doing. You can only display reports more recent than a certain number of hours. And this could be handy. Let's say that an incident, it's a big incident, and it's been going on for several days. But you want to see what the current conditions are. So you would just want to look at reports that have been received in the last 6 hours. You don't care what happened yesterday because crews may have already gotten out and repaired internet and repaired power lines and so forth. So you want to limit it to only 6 hours. So you just click that, put a 6 in here, and you'll see only most recent reports then. Or if you want to get fancier, you can do this one, limit to date range. You can set a starting date, ending date, one or the other, down to the minute. So you might want to see what it looked like maybe yesterday, look at what it looks like today and compare and see if progress is being made in the restoration of services, or maybe this morning and maybe the afternoon, and compare there. And again, that's where this stored filter sets can be very handy, because you might set a date range for yesterday and store it with a filter set called yesterday, and then have another one for today and store it as called today. And then you could display today, switch to yesterday, display yesterday, and go back and forth very easily by choosing the filter sets without having to go through all of the filling in the dates each time. So that's handy for that. So let me sort of run through this one more time. I know there's a lot of stuff on here, and to learn this, the best way to learn it is to get some examples and play with them. Go through and try doing different things on this field and see how it affects the map. Let me clear the selections here, and we'll sort of do a review here before we leave this form. So at the top, we've got the date range selection, where we can do either no date filtering, filter by a certain number of hours in the past, or starting and ending time. Here we've got enable filtering altogether, or disable it, just turns off all the filters. And here we've got include text fields or don't. And like here is I've turned off text fields, and we have only the multiple choice. Turn on text fields, and we get things like agency and city and so forth. This select reports that match any enable filter item. So like if you had, let's say, no internet, and you also had no landline, if it either no internet or no landline, it would be selected. If you could do this over here, select reports matching all enable filter items, only those that had no internet and also had no landline would be selected. Down this button clears all selection, just sets everything back to this, ignore and default colors. We have down here which markers to show on map, and we can either display all markers with colors indicated the selected ones, or display only the markers that are selected by the filters that you've chosen, like no internet, no landline, or so forth. And over here, we've got several other color choices. This is the default color for unselected markers. This is the color if multiple colors are selected. And this is the color used for your home location, green by default, showing where you are on the map. So, when I'm finished up here, if you guys have questions about this, I'll be happy to go back to this screen and we'll go over it again some more. Now, one of the things up here, let me clear all this stuff. We've got clear all selections, display all markers. Let me turn off filtering for a second. Get everything back. Up here, you notice on the menu bar, there's a word summary. If you click summary, it will give you a summary of all the reports. Let me turn off the text fields first. So let's sort of run down. Now, for each question we had in the form, like are AM/FM broadcast stations functioning? 4 reports, which is 0.4%, said no. 861, 97%, he said yes. Cell phone functioning, 81 reports said no, 792 said yes, commercial power and so forth. So for every question on there, it'll tell you how many reports were received and the percentage breakdowns for each answer that was given for that. Over here, you can include or exclude the text fields. If I include the text fields, then under agency, we've got every agency that sent in reports. Let me scroll down here a little bit. Let's get down to state. That's an interesting one. Let's see here. That's city, I think. Let's get down to state. So here's a breakdown by state. So we had, for example, 18 from Alabama. We had 219 from Florida. Let's see here, 29 from Kentucky and so forth, so on. 238 from Texas. So you can get a breakdown of the states that reported. So basically every item that was on the form, you can get a summary here. So if someone said, well, what percentage of the reports say there's no internet, use the summary and just go down to the no internet section and see how many said yes, how many said no, or how many said they don't know. You can, when you're generating the summary, you can either use all reports that have come in, or you can use only the reports matching the map filters. So if you filter, let's say you filter out some reports, maybe you filter out, you only have reports selected for the Carolinas, and you select only reports matching the filters, well, and you've got the filter select to exclude everybody except for the Carolinas, then you'd get a breakdown with these percentages for the Carolinas only, ignoring all of the states. So that's the basic thing. We've got filtering, we've got summaries. Let me close this and get back to the main screen. Okay, on this screen, let's look at a few other things we've got on here. We talked about selecting the type of map. Let's talk about generating CSV file. A CSV file, a comma separated value file, can either separate by comma or tab. There's some people prefer one or the other. You can set an age date limit if you wish. You can include only reports corresponding to markers on the map if you want to, for example, as we said, maybe just only generate CSV file for the Carolinas or Texas or something like that. Now, this is an interesting option here. Generate new CSV file when reports are received. If you check that box, every time a report comes in and is stored in the database, without you doing anything, Express automatically creates an updated CSV file that includes that new report. Now, this is real handy if the agency you're working with has a GIS expert, and the GIS expert has a commercial program, ArcGIS or something like that, that takes the CSV file and generates fancier maps or maybe reports or charts, various of maybe pie charts or whatever. And whenever a report comes in, it generates a new CSV file, and the ArcGIS sees the CSV file has changed, so it updates its reports and charts and so forth. So once you set that, if reports are coming in, you don't have to do anything to update the CSV file. It's updated automatically. And then an external program that's using this CSV file can update its maps and charts automatically from that. This is the name of the CSV file you want to generate. And if you want to generate it just on the fly immediately, just click the Generate CSV File button. There's another type of file used by some commercial programs called KML. It's a keyhole markup language file. I don't think it's as commonly used as CSV files, but it's a somewhat different format than CSV. And this can generate that also. It's same options. Once again, we have automatically generated new reports, the name of the KML file, and so forth. The export data is a little different. The CSV file is really most useful for an external programs, something like ArcGIS. What the export data does, it exports the database with all of the information needed for doing that map filtering, the display, everything. So if someone says, they're impressed with what you're doing, maybe they want to join the party, maybe it's a higher up who heard about what you're doing and they want to get in on generating maps of their own for the incident, what you can do is export your data, which will encapsulate everything that you've received, all of the option, everything at all, and send it to them. And then they can use the filtering, the mapping, and do everything you've been doing. So it's a way of just totally giving them your data. When they receive it, they use the import form data and it goes into the database and boom, they're ready to go with everything that you've got. Okay, well, that's enough for that. Now, let me talk about a couple of other things unrelated to the forms per se, and that is uh, if you look at messages, normal messages, they don't have to have forms at all. You'll see in the header a line like this: location, certain latitude, in this case north, longitude west, and in this case it says GPS. Others, let me see, track this one. This says grid square. This is the location of the person who sent this message to you. And again, this works for normal, like here's a message I got that has no attachments at all, no forms at all, but I still get a location where it was sent from. So this is the location of whoever sent you the message. If they have a GPS unit, it'll say GPS. If they don't have GPS, it'll usually say grid square. But there's a way I'm going to show you in a minute that if you know what your location is, but you don't have GPS, you can specify it to get a more accurate location than grid square. Now, you can look at this and say, well, that's kind of nice knowing what latitude and longitude is. Well, it's a little handier than that. Up here on the toolbar, just to the right of the globe icon you use to get to the maps, there's a little blue rectangle with a dot in it. If you click that, it'll show you a little map of where the person who sent the message is. Let me get another one here. Let's see here a second. Let's try this one. Okay, so we've got a location here. All right, let's see, where is that guy? So we go up here, show the map for him. Here it is. He is a little west of Sacramento. I think that's Davis, California. Maybe zoom in a little bit. Yeah, Davis, California. So we see that message was sent to us from Davis, California. So any message you receive, you can try this. If for any message you got, just pick the message out and select it, and then click the little rectangle with a dot in it, and you'll see where it came from. Now, if we go back into the mapping selection screen, and we've been working with the field situation report, but if I open all the choices, one of the choices you're going to have is messages. Messages, all these messages we received that had the location in the header, that created a mapping database. If we just select messages and display the map, we'll get a map showing the location of all the people who've sent messages to me. If I put the cursor over, I can find out who it is that sent the message, when they sent it, and more information about it, subject, the message, and so forth. So you can have a look, and it's kind of fun. You can sort of see where the people are who are sending you messages. Okay, let's go and look in the GPS screen. The GPS control screen is up here. This little crosshair. I don't think I have a GPS plugged in here. I don't know. It doesn't seem to be showing up anywhere. Maybe I don't have the right GPS. Let's see, COM5. Ah, there it is. I do have a GPS, just the wrong COM port. Now, let's say you don't have a GPS. Then what you can do down here you can specify, if you know your latitude and longitude, maybe from your phone or from a commercial GPS handheld unit, you can manually enter your latitude and longitude in these fields on this screen, and then check this box at the bottom. And this says, if no GPS position, use position report location as my current location. So if I don't have GPS, or GPS stops working, then it's going to use this position here. So if you're somewhere and you don't have a GPS dongle, but you can determine your latitude and longitude through other means, just manually enter it here, check this box at the bottom, and that's what will be used on your outgoing messages for your location. Okay, one more thing here. We're going to wrap it up and take questions. If you open one of the HF session screens, I've got VARA HF here, but similar thing would happen with Pactor. We open that session. Let me drag this down a little bit. No, not now. Let's see here. We've got the usual channel selection, start and stop and so forth. There's another item here that you may or never have used, and it's called a map. This is on the session screen for VARA. Click map, and you get a map showing the location of all the RMSs that are capable of, that support VARA HF. And you can put your cursor over it to find out what the call sign is. If you click on it, then up here at the top, it selects the call sign of the station. It shows its bearing and range relative from where you are, and also the channels. And you can open the channel list. This guy has 2 channels for VARA. And it has, this is the propagation quality, 46 for this guy. Now these are color coded. The ones that are green have a you have a good chance of reaching them because of their frequency and where they're located and propagation at the current time. So if I click on this one, you can see this, and you can see that it has 2 channels, both of them 47. The red markers are ones that have poor propagation quality, you probably can't reach. There's also, here's an orange one here, marginal quality. So if I choose one, let's say I pick one like this one, and then the best channel up here is the 7103, click select channel, that his call sign has been put there, the 7103 channels put there, and you're ready to start calling. So it's another way of choosing RMSs to call. All right, that's about all I've got. I think Steve wants to say some things, and we have time for questions. So let me hand it back over to you, Dan, and you can open it up for questions and ask Steve to make his comments or whatever you want to do.
David, go ahead and come on. You've got your hand up. If you got a camera, please turn your camera on, folks.
Yeah, this is Dave in Seattle. If I'm collecting reports from stations, say hourly, will my reports, will the new reports overwrite the old ones?
No, they're just added to the database. It just continues to accumulate. If you only want to see the new ones, you can do that selection on date range, but the new ones do not overwrite them. They get added to the database for that form.
David,
Thank you.
David, for your agency, if you had an external GIS program, you would be able to link to the file that Phil talked about, the CSV file, for example, for ArcGIS. And every time you got an additional element or component on the map or additional report period, it would reflect on the file itself.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And Barry, how are we doing in the chat?
We're pretty up to date in the chat. Phil and Steve have been answering a lot of questions.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, Steve, why don't you take it away on your portion?
The reason why I wanted to say something is this is the first of a series. And the next Thursday night, Oliver Dully, K6OLI, who's the WInLink development team forms manager, is going to discuss, and probably Greg Kerslowitz, who's also on here, who does the lion's share of the actual forms work, for which we're so grateful. Oliver is going to talk about WInLink forms and give an update on all the WInLink forms that are relevant and need to be discussed. He will demonstrate some very useful updates to the standard forms like WInLink check-in or specialized forms that are used by SOTA or POTA spotters, DigiFeelIt, etc. Anyway, you'll learn how to leverage WInLink forms data for visual display on any GIS software, including that in WInLink that Phil described this evening. And you may want to be prepared to participate, because he'll probably ask us or those that can to put a message out so he can see it on the map. I don't know what he's going to do, but whatever he does, he's pretty good at it. And so I wanted to describe that. The week after that is going to be a practical example of somebody that Oliver has lined up in California that uses these processes. There it is. And then the last September 21, Oliver's going to sort of summarize all this and explain how one would manage these forms regardless of what type of incident you're in, whether you need hospital forms or whether you need to send a picture of Johnny's femur, compound fracture, or whatever you need to use forms for. Oliver will try to bring that all together to fruition. So that's my promo talk here, and I hope people will come and enjoy it and learn something. Thank you.
Okay, thank you much, Steve. Anybody got any questions of what Steve was talking about? Paul, go ahead.
My question was about a GPS thing, if we're ready for that.
Okay,
Sure.
On when I read people's messages, it'll give their location and it will specify that the GPS was either grid square. It'll say specified GPS or grid square. And so I'll get online and do a position report, put in my dongle, and it'll get my GPS position, and my messages will reflect that the location is based on GPS. It seems like if I get into that position report thing, or I do something, maybe I wipe the numbers out of there, or maybe I turn the computer on and off. It seems like the next message I send, a few hours later, it'll revert back to grid square. And I wonder if I'm just losing the GPS coordinates.
Well, if the GPS isn't functioning, maybe it's lost maybe it's marginal GPS signal and it's not getting a signal. Then
So
it would draw.
can I plug in the GPS, establish my location, then unplug it, and it would retain that, or it won't?
Well, I think if it doesn't have an active GPS, it's going to go to grid square unless you specify it and check that checkbox, in which case it'll fall back to specified position.
If you turn your computer off, you'll notice that the GPS stays on. And it's connected to the USB port of the computer, it will stay on. And if you unplug it and then plug it back in, you have to, like any other product that I'm aware of, modem or otherwise, you have to re-energize it. You have to reconfigure it. Okay. Just like Phil did this. When Phil first got on here, his GPS was not working. He went to it and reactivated it, and bingo, there it was.
I recently noticed in setup that next to where you put in the grid square, when you do a setup, there's now an option for putting in GPS coordinates and letting it put the grid square, populate the grid square. Does that lose the GPS coordinates when you do it
No.
that way?
No, not at all. But you can actually,
That just takes your latitude and turns it into a grid square to
right,
populate that box.
right. There's a checkbox on the GPS control screen that will cause it to update your grid square dynamically based on latitude and longitude. So like if you're on a sailboat sailing across the ocean, your grid square will be updated automatically as you move from one location to another.
Okay, I know how tempting it is, but don't just be jumping in. We'll get a lot of doubling and stuff here. So raise your hand or put a message in text, but don't just jump in if you would, please. Barry, there's some messages in text, I think, in chat. Am I wrong?
Doug from Washington wants to know about WinLink settling on a particular format for latitude and longitude, because I guess there's different formats to use, and will WinLink be standardizing on any one?
Yeah. Well, the one I prefer is the positive or negative, all numeric, degrees and decimal degrees. But a lot of GPS devices, and certainly my iPhone in the compass display, wants to give it as degrees, minutes, and seconds. Some of them give it as degrees and then minutes and fractional minutes. So kind of depends on what you're doing. I think that if you ask, let's say Google, if you go into Google and say, what is the latitude or what is the location, let's say Paris, France, it'll give it as a decimal degrees with a north or south or east or west designation, which I think is probably the most common worldwide. Well, I don't say that. Certainly the degrees, minutes, and seconds is common too. It's kind of a mess, and we pretty consistently use decimal degrees everywhere except in the position report field. And that was written before I got involved. Either Vic or Rick did that, and I've been kind of reluctant to change it. Although what I did was make it so that if you put in decimal degrees, it will accept it and convert it in the display it wants, which is degrees and minutes. So you can put in a decimal degree, and even in the grid square, even in the position report, and have it handle it. But the whole world, has an issue with different formats: degrees, minutes, second, degrees, minutes, and decimal minutes, degrees and decimal degrees, positive, negative, north and south. It's we're not the only ones who have issues with that.
Okay. Paul mentions he started using the font consoles in settings fonts for text because it distinguishes between the letter Oscar from the digit 0, O and 0. And that makes it easier to read messages when you're doing stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So that's a good suggestion. And Doug says, but when you map messages, it did not display all the field situation report form messages. Why not?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. Say it again.
But I guess when you were talking about mapping the messages versus mapping the forms, the messages only show messages. And he wants to know why it didn't display all the fields.
Because I on this computer, I use this for Zoom meetings and things like that. I don't use it for my actual WinLink, and I imported the database for the that exercise. I didn't actually receive those messages, so I don't have message entries corresponding to all those reports. I only have the mapping database that I need to display the maps and filter.
Okay, that explains it. Okay. From Jan, can the mapping display work without being on the internet? i.e. with
That's
OSM
good.
for
Yeah, I should have mentioned that. That's a good question. And the answer is a qualified yes. And what I mean by that is the pretty maps, like the Bing maps, the Google maps, the topology maps, and so forth, require internet. If you don't have internet, it will fall back to a very simple outline type map that doesn't have any roads, doesn't have any cities marked, but it does have the outline of countries and the relative position of markers on it. It's a pretty crude map, but it is a map that displays it. Now, I understand that it's a reasonable criticism to say, well, it seems odd that you require internet for the WinLink system. Well, the way it works in real life is that in a real incident, typically the command post is located in a facility or in a location that has internet. It may be in the EOC, or some other place, a major facility that has generators, and typically they'll have internet, or they'll have satellite to provide internet. They'll have some way of getting internet because internet is so important for the command post. Now, the people out in the field reporting in that the hurricane's gone through, they don't have power, they don't have internet, don't have cell phones or anything. Those people don't have internet where they're sending the reports. But typically, the command posts where they're receiving them and displaying the maps will have internet. But even if they don't, you can produce a kind of a crude map that does show the markers.
Okay. Is there any way to download and cache maps before an incident so you'll have
Not that I know. That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, it sounds like in theory you could. There is some caching of maps that takes place in the mapping package we use. I have not tried it. I mean, I think that would be that's an exercise left to the reader to see if you display it, move around, scroll a little bit, and get a map up there, and then turn off internet, whether it'll still be available if you, let's say, stop and restart Express or close the map screen and go back in. That's a good exercise. I'll give it a try, and you guys can try it.
how much at Starlink?
Starlink's a great system. I own one myself. I think it's certainly it works great. Provide internet for this or anything else.
That's all. We're up to date in chat, Dan.
One note on Starlink. The cabin you see behind me, I can't use Starlink there because there's too many trees.
Yeah, that's a problem.
When it works well.
Yeah.
Okay, oh well, Paul, you got your hand up. Come on in.
I'll unmute. Yeah, I normally operate in Oregon, but sometimes I vacation in another area. So when I was in Idaho with no internet, and then I tried the map function, I just got multiple rectangles or squares. Nothing came through, no simple map, just.
Well, I'll tell you what, when you, after the session, go back into the map choices where you have like the Bing and the Google and the Topo and so forth, and look at the very bottom, and there's a simple map choice. Simple, I think it's a simple map, no internet. Try selecting that.
Okay, while we're doing that, are there any more questions out there?
We're good in chat.
Okay, for Paul, you got your hand again. Could you turn the camera on and ask your question?
Start the video. Yes, there's a video. I was going to ask on that last session where he was saying go into a setting. Is that under settings, and is it under?
Open the map control screen, the one where you can select the type of map.
Okay, so right now I'm looking at the top taskbar, says settings, message, open session.
No. Click the globe icon on the toolbar. The globe.
Okay. Oh yeah, I never used that. Okay, got it. Okay.
Now you see there's a selection of the type of map, or which kind of map. I
Okay,
think Bing is the
that
default.
gets me started. Thanks.
And then you open that, you should see at the bottom of it, I think, like a simple map, no internet, something like that.
I'll find it. I'm in the right
Okay.
spot.
Okay.
Yep, I see it.
Okay.
I could say that we're a volunteer organization, and anybody that has any expertise in providing a better map for us, have at it. Contact Phil Sherrod at phil@philsherrod.com. I'm sure he'd take that with open arms.
Well, with the as long as you have internet, we got a lot of good choices on maps.
Yeah, and like you said, when you're out in the field, you're sending this in to an agency or to a pretty good sized incident, or both, and you're copying the FEMA region and a bunch of other recipients that want the data that you're providing. Somebody is going to have the tools to provide that in great detail, visually pleasing detail, and those that don't will get it in the format that we provide.
Okay, anybody else?
Going once, going twice, sold to Dan.
Well, this has been pretty close to the market you did find there. Phil, and it's good to see you again.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil.
Thanks, everybody.
But we had like at the height of it, 84 people on this presentation. And of course, there'll be when it shows up on the social media of YouTube and others, it will get even a higher rating. So this was needed information, stuff that people are looking for.
Okay.
Thank you all for coming, Steve, and everybody else.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank
Good
you,
to see you
Phil.
all.
7-3.
Okay. Good to see you guys.
Every three.
Take care. All right. Take care.